It's Cougar Sports Saturday.
That's caught! Touchdown! Stayed inside the boundary and gets in for 6.
Cougar Sports Saturday, a presentation of KSL Sports.
Richie right to the rim, driving score! He would not be denied!
BYU Sports Talk by Cougar fans for Cougar fans. Sponsored by Any Hour Services, electrical, plumbing, heating, and air. Your hosts are Mitch Harper and Kyle Ireland. On Utah's legacy home of the Cougars, KSL News Radio, 102.7 FM and 1160 AM.
The national championship in college football is finally set. I say finally because it's January 10th and we just barely learned of who's going to be playing in the national title. The football season stretches out too long in college football, in my opinion, these days, but still, we know who's in the national championship game. Number 10, Miami, will host, because they're going to be playing on their home field, number 1, Indiana. Indiana absolutely crushed Oregon last night in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, and it sets up the Canes versus the Hoosiers for it all, for the national title on Monday, January 19th in Miami. But it gets me thinking, Kyle. Again, Mitch Harper, Kyle Ireland with you here on Cougar Sports Saturday. Indiana, think about this, Kyle. Their roster has the following: 0 5-star players, only 7 4-star players. That's the Indiana Hoosiers, who look dominant and are crushing everyone in their path. BYU next year, early outlook, still a long way to go in piecing together the roster. BYU, 12 4-stars on its 2026 roster as of now, 0 5-stars. Why can't BYU become the next Indiana? Could BYU become the next Indiana when you see a team like the Hoosiers breaking through, getting to the national championship game with a roster that the Stars would say is very similar to BYU? Could BYU become the next Indiana?
Unless the national narrative and perspective changes, Mitch, I'm going to say no. Because we've seen how BYU has been viewed the last 2 years. We've seen how the Big 12 has been viewed. And unless that narrative changes, I'm going to say no. Because of the SEC and the Big 10. And frankly, it's ESPN and the relationship with the college football playoff and the bias that occurs there. I'm going to say no.
Well, when you bring up ESPN and the national narrative, this was Kirk Herbstreit moments after the Fiesta Bowl when Miami took down Ole Miss, talking about the new age of constructing rosters in college football.
One thing that I think we've been able to witness firsthand, if you're a coach watching this or a GM watching this, while you're chasing 5-stars and agents, street agents, and everything you're dealing with, you better build a team. Indiana, they don't have a lot of 5-stars. You know what they got? They got a team. This is still a team sport, and it's about winning games. Did you hear Miami when they got up on Jacoby Thomas? I mean, he almost had tears in his eyes talking about, I'm going to play for my guys. Like, if you don't build that and you just chase 5-stars, you're never going to be here on that stage. You better stop chasing just this craziness, and you better step back and say, if those are your demands, get out of here. We're going to go find guys that want to be a part of this and want to play, because that's what's getting here.
Who's not chasing the craziness? Who's retaining its current players? That's BYU. I mean, it makes me wonder, because maybe with all this money that's getting thrown into these programs and these players individually, it's creating these egos, and where on paper you look at some of these teams and go, my goodness, how can this team be beat? They got so much talent, so much star power, yet maybe it is truly an era where the teams that want to be together, that are a team, they're the ones that come out on top. And Indiana's profile from a star rating perspective is very similar to BYU. And you see how BYU the last 2 years have been knocking on the doorstep of the playoff, and now they're retaining a majority of those guys who have won 23 games in the past 2 years in the Big 12, which leads the league since the 16-team Big 12 was created. I kind of think that BYU, with the way that Kalani's building things, he's kind of taking, like what Kirk Herbstreit is saying right there, that to me is what Kalani's trying to build with BYU football.
Yeah, I think so as well, but I think it's hypocrisy from Kirk Herbstreit because last year he was talking about Indiana going into the playoff having not beat anybody.
It's fair.
It was unbelievable. He was like, yeah, like I want the 12 best teams to be in here, and I don't think Indiana's one of them. I'm obviously paraphrasing and putting words in his mouth.
And Herbie is not the best person to always point to, but I thought he is kind of the voice of college football.
No, for sure. But that's the problem, Mitch, is because everybody looks at ESPN and these talk shows. I mean, just go back to how BYU was viewed throughout this playoff selection process. The fact that they weren't given any respect and they had only had one loss and was to Texas Tech, and then they faced them again. You look at last year in the 2024 playoff selection process, SMU was in a very similar position to BYU in what BYU is this year. It just happened to be that they played two different teams and lost in the conference championship game, and Clemson got in with the auto bid, and SMU was able to sneak in as an at-large. BYU should have been in the exact same position this year. Let me pull this up real quick. If you look at the preseason rankings, Mitch, and people's national champion predictions and all of those types of things based off of things, this is the preseason rankings. You had Texas, then Penn State, then Ohio State, then Clemson, Georgia, Notre Dame, Oregon, Alabama, LSU. That was the top 9. 10 was Miami. You know where Indiana was? 20. You know where BYU was? The first one receiving votes. Okay, so if BYU wants to be the next Indiana, then they need to be 20. They need to be 10. I mean, Miami, that's crazy. They were 10 in the playoff rankings as well. Like, that might have been the only thing they were accurate about throughout the course of the season. They weren't accurate about Indiana. They weren't accurate about BYU. So if BYU doesn't get love in the preseason rankings going into 26, that's going to set BYU up for failure.
Indiana has the benefit of the doubt a little bit from the standpoint they're in the Big Ten. The Big 12 does not get that benefit of the doubt. So you might probably think if Indiana starts at 20, BYU's probably got to be around 12.
Yep.
I would.
Absolutely.
And then you got to strategically, if you're the Big 12 and you look at BYU next year, because, again, BYU's loading up. I mean, I still think they got to get some work done in the portal, but still, with what you've got already announced returning, this BYU football team, you should have high expectations if you're a Cougar fan. Don't hold back. Don't be that I don't want to get my hopes up too high. No, believe. BYU's chasing something. They're trying to get to the ultimate prize.
They don't play Texas Tech in the regular season this year. I think that's a big thing.
ASU comes home to Provo, which I love that too.
But you think about it, in the way that the Big 12 has been viewed in the playoff selection era the last 2 years, they've only gotten one team in as an auto bid. They don't have a chance right now in the way that they're being viewed as a league to get an at-large.
But I'm more optimistic about the Big 12 having a chance for multiple bids next year. And it sounds crazy to even talk about next year before this season's even concluded. But I'd like to think, depending on how these rosters are getting built out, Texas Tech's going to probably be a preseason top 10 team. I would expect. I think what they're doing in the portal, you can knock how they played against Oregon, but still that defense showed up. I mean, Oregon got completely shut down offensively by Texas Tech. It was just their offense let them down. I'm not completely sold on Brendan Sorsby. I'm almost kind of blown away that that's a $5 million quarterback, but I digress. They're going to get some preseason love, and BYU as well. And I bring that up because the Big 12, since BYU joined this league, outside of year one when Texas was in the conference, no one gets preseason hype. No one. It's always been the narrative, well, let's go out to the Big 12 where 14 teams could win it. It's the most wide open league. And look, that could still be the case next year, but you got two teams in BYU and Texas Tech that really on paper should be the favorites. Hands down. There's no questions asked. They should be the favorites. I think Utah's going to be rebuilding. We'll see what happens with Devin Dampier. But BYU's got to go there to Salt Lake, and that's going to be tough with now Morgan Scalley as the head coach. Big 12 is going to be good. And I think the rosters are well-financed in this league, resourced. There's good football, and I think the talent is spreading out. And one thing I do love about what's happening right now in the sport is that the aura, the mystique of the SEC is kind of crumbling a bit. They haven't been in the national championship game as many years as the Big 12. It's been 3 years since they appeared in a national championship game. The last time they had a national championship game appearance was also the last time the Big 12 appeared in the national title. So don't give me this SEC needs 7, 8, 9 teams in the playoff. No. The SEC has gamed the system in many respects with the 8 conference games for far too long. Then they had a breather late in the schedule to kind of heal up and get rested up for the final push. I like, though, seeing a team that has a roster profile similar to BYU that says it can happen. And you feel like you got the coach, you feel like you got the personnel, you got the retention, you've got the resources. Why not BYU?
I think you're spot on. But I also look at, like, obviously it was a 4-team playoff at this point in time when TCU made the title game a few years ago. But
that's more impressive, I would argue, that they broke through and they beat Michigan.
But do you think that there's a scenario that could play out where BYU, maybe it's a similar situation to this year, where they lose in the regular season and get into the Big 12 title game and don't get the auto bid? Or, like, could they come out of it with, like, a TCU where they lost the championship game but still got into the playoff after losing to K-State?
The interesting data point for BYU next year is going to be Notre Dame.
Yep.
You have to be strategic of where that game lands. And if you're the Big 12, you hope that's a midway point of the season game, kind of like where the Utah game was this past year, say October 17th, somewhere in there, October 10th, in that range. If you're the Big 12, you give BYU a bye week before that game. Give them 2 weeks to build up, because Notre Dame, I would expect, will probably be really good, I would think. I mean, Marcus Freeman's just built up consistency in that program, where on the low end, they're probably an 8-4 team. On the high end, maybe they're a national title contender. I mean, that's what Notre Dame has shown under Marcus Freeman. They were probably good enough to get into the playoff this year and make some noise. Because clearly the higher-ranked teams in this playoff were not the unbeatable, immovable forces that everyone thought, except for Indiana. So I think that Notre Dame game is what's different compared to the past 2 years. You've got a non-conference game that steps out of the Big 12, because if you build your entire resume solely on Big 12 play, you're not going to get any benefit of the doubt. But you have a game next year that would suggest Notre Dame gives you a data point that puts you over the hump. And if BYU can be that 11-1 team with a win over Notre Dame, you got to be in, regardless of what happens in the Big 12 championship. A lot's going to happen, and there's going to be some Big 12 teams that are going to be really good next season. And look, we got to figure out how this schedule is going to stack up. Typically, the schedule gets released at the end of January, early February in the Big 12. That plays a big part in determining the strength of the schedule. You can just look at the opponents and say, okay, that doesn't look too daunting, but how it stacks up. Do you get back-to-back road games at all? Do you get every other? Like, how that all kind of shakes out. But I love the fact that BYU has 7 home games, one of which is Notre Dame. You don't leave the state only 4 times next year. So from a health perspective, you'd like to think that pretty manageable, that BYU is not going to be physically drained going into the postseason. Whereas I will say this team this year, they had so much travel. There were 8 road games this year, 6 in the regular season, Arlington with the Big 12 championship, and then the bowl game. 8 games where you're getting on a plane. Next year, you cut that by at least 2, unless you're going deep into the playoffs. So I think that alone can help the cause, too, of moving a little bit closer to breaking through in the playoff. Let's take a break. We'll talk some more BYU football around the corner. It's Cougar Sports Saturday, powered by KSL Sports.